Okay, good evening, everyone. Again, welcome, Bobby and Sadie, welcome, Marina, Phyllis, and whoever's joining us on the iPhone, and whoever will be joining us very soon. We are in Makkos Yutes Amud Aleph, and so that's where we're up to, 19a, Yutes Amud Aleph. And we're going to actually get into a sugya today that I'm pretty excited about. You see, let me start off with a question for you to think about, and God willing, we'll answer it toward the end of our shir, which is, what year are we in right now in the, what's significant about this year on the Jewish calendar? Anyone know?
Shemitah year.
Very good, Marina. So it's the 7th year of the Shemitah cycle. It's Shvius, the 7th year. And so there is a debate as to whether Shemitah that we keep today is deoraisa, is it biblical, or are we like keeping it derabanan? Or according to minority opinion, it might not even be midrabanan. It might not even be rabbinical. It might even just be a midas chasidus, a nice thing to do. So buckle up. We'll find out the answer, or we'll find out the beginning of the debate that eventually leads to the answer, Bezos Hashem, in our Gemara today.
Isn't there some connection to Torah with the Shemitah?
Shemitah
Bashnat Hashvi'i or something? The 7th year?
Yeah, very good. So there's a connection to Kol Torah Kula. All right.
Thank you.
So let's begin. Welcome, Toby. Okay. No.
What page are we on, please?
We are on 19a. That's 19a. Yutes Amud Aleph.
Okay.
All right. And so Toby came to keep me company. The code? No, same code. Oh, I'll show you afterwards. Yeah, you got the right one. Oh, sorry. The chapel was still open, so I guess that's how you got in. All right. Well, anyway, we will begin on Yud Tes Amud Aleph 19a. I think either to the first or second power. It's a tough call. I think still in the first power, if I were to guess. We are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines from the top. Amar Rav Sheshes. So again, we're going to find out a little bit about Shemitah tonight. Shemitah doesn't get directly referenced in the Gemara, but what we talk about tonight will be very important for determining to what degree is Shemitah an obligation Bizman Hazeh today. But what we're going to be focusing on primarily are 3 other forms of agricultural offerings, let's call them, even though it's not purely agricultural. One is we're going to talk about Meiser Sheni, our good old friend Meiser Sheni. Why do we remember Meiser Sheni? Because again, if I want to re-traumatize all of us, our favorite sugya about if I have a tree that's inside Yerushalayim, but the branches are outside Yerushalayim, and I'm standing on the tree, but there's a ladder to the tree, right? So remember that whole sugya that we had, lots of fun. That was talking about Meiser Sheni that needs to be eaten within the walls of Yerushalayim. We will also be talking about the Bechor offering again, about Bechoros, the firstborn offering, which must be brought to the Beis HaMikdash. It's an offering after all, as well as Bikurim, the first fruits which are given to Kohanim. Those are the 3 important categories that we will be discussing tonight. So just without getting too deep into it, I want to make sure those 3 categories, we just know the basic definitions. Is there anything I can clarify on those? Because it'll be very helpful to remember what they are before we start the Gemara. Again, Meiser Sheni, Bikurim, and Bechoros. Now's your chance. Any questions on those, what they mean? Okay, so here we go. Amar Rav Sheshes, Bikurim hanocha ma'akeves behen, kriya ein ma'akeves behen. So we went off a little bit of a tangent. Now we're bringing it back into our original discussion. So Bikurim, the question was for the first fruits, is it that I just need to place them down in the temple, or do I also need to read the psukim? Now, everyone holds that I should be reading the psukim associated with Bikurim. But the question is, if I neglect to read them, have I not fulfilled the mitzvah completely? And also, if a Kohen eats from Bikurim, before the Yisrael recites those psukim, would the Kohen be held accountable? Would he be culpable for eating it? So what we're going to do right now is it's going to be a little bit of a long-winded proof. We're going to bring up another question where within the proof to answering this other question we're about to delve into, we're going to see that the premise of the question and answer in this discussion we're about to bring up will be telling us that actually hanacha is all that matters. You don't need to worry about the kriya, at least to be yotzei the mitzvah, and vis-a-vis the Kohen does not need to wait for it in order to eat the truma. So again, we want to set out to find out, is hanacha ma'akeves and kriya is not ma'akeves. Again, just those terms again, kriya is reading, hanacha is placing down, and ma'akiv or ma'akeves is that means it's essential and it would withhold the mitzvah if you do not do it. Here we go. So come on, who does he hold like? Ki hai Tana, Tanya, Rav Yossi Omer, Shlosha Devar Mishum Shlosha Zakanim. Rav Yossi quoted 3 teachings, the name of 3 elders. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, so one of them was Rabbi Yishmael, right? Our good old friend Rabbi Yishmael in the morning, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, yeah. So Rabbi Yishmael says, Yochel Yalo Adam Meiser Shein Bisman Hazeh Yishalayim V'Yochlenu. You know, when I was in Israel for 2 years, I never had to bring Meiser Sheni to Yerushalayim. Well, why would I? Well, I guess I wasn't really planting anything in Israel, but why don't you see people bringing Meiser Sheni to Yerushalayim today? Why is that no longer practiced? I would think, you know, maybe you should be practicing it today. So he answers, V'dinhu, Bechor ta'un havas makom. We have a comparison. Bechor, the firstborn offering, needs to be brought to a sacred place. It needs to be brought to the Beis HaMikdash. Umeiser Sheni ton havas makom. And Meiser Sheni also needs to be brought to a sacred place. Not specifically the Beis HaMikdash, but Yerushalayim. So ma bechor eino ela b'fnei habayis, av meiser eino ela b'fnei habayis. One could suggest, at the same way, we don't do bechor offerings anymore when we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. So too, meiser sheni, which also has the same parameters as bechoros, it also needs to be brought to a sacred place. Perhaps that also is no longer practiced when we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. So maybe that's why we don't practice Meiser Sheni today. Oh, no, nothing. Oh, we're on 19A. I would guess 2 by now. Unless anyone have an art scroll just so I could shout out where we're up to. So you just tell us where you're up to in the art scroll. You just like to the, what power are we up to? Someone on here has to have an art scroll, right?
19A to the first hour.
Thank you, Gloria. So Gloria says the first power it's still on. Okay. We're looking for the words Mala b'chor shechin ton matan damen. Gloria, what column in the in that page are you on? First, second.
What column? I was trying to follow you in the Hebrew.
Oh, okay, very good, very good. All right. Okay, hopefully we'll track it down. But anyway, just yeah, there's a little bit of a train of thought over here. So let's just bring it in. So maybe Meiser Sheni should be practiced nowadays. Literally right now, we should be practicing it. But the same way Bechor is not practiced nowadays, so too Meiser Sheni shouldn't be practiced nowadays. However, we say that's not a good comparison. Bechoros and Meiser Sheni are not completely analogous. Mal Bechor shechin ton matan damen ve'emur legabe mizbeach. You see, Bechor has a chumrah. Bechor is as a more stringent category. Welcome, Melissa. So Bechor requires matan damin ve'emur legabi mizbeach. Bechoros need to put the entrails on the altar. Meiser Sheni, you just bring it to your shalim and eat it. There's no aspect of bringing it on the mizbeach on the altar. So we can already see that Bechoros seem to be a higher category than Meiser Sheni. If so, if they're strict in one area of halacha, you would think for other halachas they'd also be stricter, logic would dictate. So therefore, just because bechoros are not practiced nowadays because they require the Beis HaMikdash, who's to say Meiser Sheni has those strict requirements? Maybe Meiser Sheni should still be practiced nowadays. It's not a good analogy. However, bichurim yochichu. Okay, so a little bit of background. What we are going to see now is called a tzad hashava. A tzad hashava works as follows. This is basic Talmudic logic that is important to know all throughout Shas. Generally, what we try to do is we make a comparison between two things, like we just did. But then we say, these two things are not completely analogous because one is more chamor than the other. So maybe because I think it's more chamor, is more stringent than the category we want to learn too, therefore the analogy breaks down. However, why did we say Bechor is more stringent than Meiser Sheni? Because Bechor, you have to bring the offering on the Mizbeach. Well, what if I bring in a second category called Bikurim, first fruits? First fruits, they are not practiced when we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, but you might be tempted to say, oh, well, Bikurim, why aren't they practiced? Well, the thing with Bikurim is Bikurim doesn't have the stringency or the aspect of bringing the offering on the Mizbeach. So the fact that you want to say we can't learn from Bechor to Meiser Sheni, the same way Bechor is not done nowadays, so to Meiser Sheni is not practiced nowadays. The fact that Bechor is also brought on the Mizbeach is a red herring. That's basically what we're proving. The fact that Bechor also is brought on the Mizbeach doesn't indicate to me that's more chamor than the category of Meiser Sheni, because we see Bikurim, which doesn't share that quality of being brought on the Mizbeach, also has that criterion that requires the Beis HaMikdash to be standing. If so, we have it tzad hashava, common denominator is what it means. The common denominator, Bikurim and Bechoros have their own unique qualities. But the common denominator, the tzad hashava shebahen, that they share is that they both require the Beis HaMikdash in order for them to be practiced. So too, Meiser Sheni also should be just like them and should only be practiced when there's a Beis HaMikdash standing. However, this is a pircha. This is going to be, we're going to shoot right back here. Well, Mala Bikurim Shechein to Unim Hanacha. Bikurim have a unique quality to them. Remember, Bikurim require Hanacha, and this is the proof right over here. Bikurim needs to be placed down in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Azara. And because Bikurim has this more stringent quality that Meiser Sheni does not share, perhaps Bikurim is more stringent than Meiser Sheni. And, something stringent like Bikurim might require the Beis HaMikdash. Perhaps Meiser Sheni does not require the Beis HaMikdash to be standing. So therefore, the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar, forget it. We're throwing the tzad hashava out the window. Forget about this common denominator logic. Rather, we're going to use a hekesh. We're going to say that, hey, look, it says in the Torah, V'achalta lifnei Hashem Elokecha, you should eat before the Lord your God. If you look in the Torah Shalem on the side, it quotes the entire pasuk. You'll see in the pasuk, it mentions Meiser and Bechor in the same pasuk. You see that? Meiser degancha tiroshcha v'tzarecha uvechoros b'karecha v'tzonecha. So because Makish Meiser Bechor, since Meiser and Bechor are mentioned in the same pasuk, it's to teach us that they share similar laws. Ma Bechor eno el lifnei habayis, just as a Bechor is only brought when there's a Beis HaMikdash standing, Av Meiser eno el lifnei habayis, so too Meiser is only brought when there's a Beis HaMikdash standing. So no tzad hashava, just simply they're in the same pasuk, so there is a hekesh. There's a connection between the two by virtue of being in the same list. Now, that's the end of this part here. Why did we bring in all of this? So if you remember, the question we were trying to solve here had nothing to do with Meiser Sheni, had nothing to do with Bechoros. What our primary concern is when it comes to Bikurim, first fruits, do I need to do the Kriya? Does the recitation of the psukim of first fruits, is that me'akev? Is that essential? So in this whole back and forth, the shock of Attar we had, remember the reason we rejected the tzad hashava? The reason we rejected the tzad hashava was because we said, how can I learn from Bikurim to Meiser Sheni? Bikurim requires hanacha, requires placement. Wait a minute. V'im isa lifroch avim isa lifroch malbi kurim shechein teunin kriya v'hanacha. If kriya was really essential, why was the rejection? Why did we say bikurim was unique? Only because it requires hanacha. We should have said it's unique because it requires kriya and hanacha. The fact that we only mentioned that kriya is essential, the Rabbi Shmuel only mentioned that, indicates to us that according to this Tana, only kriya is essential. Sorry, only hanacha is essential, not kriya. And this is a great proof for any Amora that comes later who wants to turn to Rabbi Shmuel for precedent. That is the proof from this piece over here. However, Amar Rav Ashi, well, Nehidi kuvaleka, mitzvah mileka, belema mitzvah v'lifro. Okay, great. Maybe kriya is not ma'akev, right? Maybe if I forget to read the psukim or I don't yet read the psukim and a Kohen, this Kohen just jumps on bikurim, he's really hungry and he eats the fruits, he won't be held accountable for it. But according to everybody, even if it's not ma'akev, it's certainly a mitzvah lechatchila. Certainly, I should ideally be reading the psukim. So if so, why was that not invoked? We should have mentioned kriya anyway. Elamar Rav Ashi, why was kriya omitted? We can't prove from Rabbi Shmuel that since kriya was omitted, it means he didn't hold kriya was ma'akev. Rather, why did he omit kriya, the recitation requirement for bikurim? Because unlike hanacha, which applies to both people born Jewish and to converts, here, when it comes to kriya, according to this position in the Gemara, only someone who's born a Jew will read the psukim, because in the psukim it says that our fathers were taken out of Egypt or something or another. So therefore, he can't say our fathers, my fathers, because it's he was not born into the Jewish people. However, by the way, there is a Talmud Yerushalmi, which Rambam Paskins, like we did over Rav Lichtenstein essay on Gerus, that says actually no, a ger would recite it. So there is what to discuss here. Anyway, Elamar Rav Ashi came with the Ika Bikuri Ager to Boy Lememar Asher Nishba Hashem Lavosenu, that the Lord our God swore to our forefathers. Lo Matzi Amar, since a ger cannot read these psukim, Lo Psikale, he didn't mention it. So Rabbi Shmuel, it's not that he necessarily holds that kriya is not ma'akev. Kriya may very well be essential. He just chose to emphasize hanacha, which is across the board for all Jews, for born Jewish and converts alike. But kriya may very well be a requirement anyway. He just simply wanted to go with the more salient one. Okay.
Oh, Rivka, can I call you back in a half hour? I'm on my.
There we go. Figured out how to mute. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that section of the Gemara. The rest of the Gemara now, remember, this whole Shach V'Tar was brought in just to discuss Bikurim. Is Kriya, is the recitation of the Psukim, essential? Now the Gemara is going to say, hey, this is like a really great discussion about first fruits, about Meiser Sheni. You know what? Let's not end the discussion here. Let's delve a little bit more into it. So that's going to be the questions that the Gemara is going to deal with. So let's pause for a moment. Is there anything I could just clarify on this part of the Gemara?
Rabbi, did you start the class with Shemitah? A question about
very good, Phyllis. So that's the next section of the Gemara. Next section of the Gemara will give us some insight into the status of Shemitah today.
Can I, in case I have to leave and you haven't discussed it, can I just read you the quote? It says, "Mikate sheva shanim ta'aseh shmita." V'zed bar hashmita shamot kol baal ba 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 ba. But that's in Dvarim Yudalit.
That's true, and it also says many things in the Torah, like to bring Bikurim, to bring Meiser Sheni. Yeah, we're learning that.
I thought there was a question of where it actually comes from, so maybe I spoke.
We're less concerned with the origin of Shemitah per se, because as you say, Shemitah is pretty explicit in the Torah, but less about the origin and more about does it apply today. That's the question. So you know what? Maybe who knows? We might get to it before 8 o'clock. So let's go forward. Umay Kasavar. Ika Savar Kiddush. Did I skip something? No, I skipped something. Uli Hadar Dina, a few lines back. But remember, we had a Tzad Shava before. We had Bikurim and we had Bechoros, and we want to use it as a Tzad Hashava to teach me that just Bikurim and Bechoros are in practice because there's no Beis HaMikdash. So too, Meiser Sheni is not practice today. Wait a minute. Why did we stop short and resort to a Hekesh? The Tzad Hashava is a good Tzad Hashava. Okay, Bechoros, they have to be brought on the Mizbeach. And what's it called? And Bikurim have Hanacha. But at the end of the day, they both have their own unique qualities, but they're both red herrings. At the end of the day, the one commonality they do share is that they need to be brought when the Beis HaMikdash is standing. So Meiser Sheni doesn't need to have Hanacha. It doesn't need to have be brought on Mizbeach. We should still use the Tzad Hashava. What makes Bechoros and Bikurim so different than Meiser Sheni that we can't assume that the same way they need the Beis HaMikdash to be standing, so too Meiser Sheni needs it? So the answer is Mishum de'ikol lemifrach mala tzad shava sheben shechin yesh ben tzad mizbeach. You know what? There's something unique that Bechoros and Bikurim have that Meiser Sheni doesn't. Bikurim and Bechoros both have an aspect of the Mizbeach. The Bechoros need to be brought on the Mizbeach. The Bikurim need to be brought and placed by the Mizbeach. Therefore, we see that Bikurim and Bechoros have share unique quality that Meiser Sheni does not possess. You know what? Maybe only things that are associated directly with the altar require the Beis HaMikdash, whereas something like Meiser Sheni, which it kind of makes sense, requires Yushalayim, but doesn't require the altar in the Beis HaMikdash. Maybe that would be practiced today when the Beis HaMikdash is still not standing. And therefore, the Gemara could not use the Tzad Hashava, but rather resorted to finding a Hekesh, a connection between Meiser Sheni and Bikurim and Bechoros in the pasuk. So we just cleaned up that Tzad Hashava there that we stopped prematurely. End of that piece. Now this is going to get to Shemitah. It doesn't mention Shemitah explicitly, but you're going to see the implications of this discussion have much to do with Shemitah. Umay Kasavar. But wait, let's take a step back. You know, throughout this whole discussion, we just took for granted that Bechoros, the firstborn offerings, are not practiced nowadays. And then our only question was, you know what? The same way Bechoros aren't practiced, maybe Meiser Sheni should not be practiced today. But wait a minute. Who's to say Bechoros aren't practiced nowadays? Where do you get that from? Umay Kasavar. So there's a machlokus. After Ezra came and can't say conquered, but he took back Yerushalayim, they took back Eretz Yisrael to a certain extent, and they re-sanctified it. Does the sanctity of the Ole Bavel, those who came up from Babylonia to Eretz Yisrael, when they re-sanctified the land, does that sanctity last nowadays? Or after the Jews were kicked out after the second Beis HaMikdash, did we then lose the sanctity of the land of Israel once more? That is, and question about the Beis HaMikdash as well. That's the question here. So it's machlokus. Well, if I hold the Kedusha remains nowadays, then why are we not practicing Bechor nowadays? If the Kedusha remains today, then I should be practicing Bechoros today as well. And and look, even if there is no Kedusha today, it didn't last after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Nonetheless, we should be asking ourselves, you know what? What about, and you have to read between the lines, Rashi puts this in for us. Let's say imagine this is a crazy scene. You know, there's a siege of the Beis HaMikdash. And one guy, he's like, I remember there was a video after the recent conflict with Gaza. So there's a video in Tel Aviv of, rockets and Iron Dome interacting. And there's all of a sudden you see a rocket shoot down in Tel Aviv, like some guy's videoing out on the street. And then all the dust clears. And there's this guy on the sidewalk who just eating his shawarma, unfazed completely. He's just like, oh, okay. He goes back to eating his shawarma. So imagine, this is basically the case over here. Imagine there's a guy, he just had his carbon. They did this rikas dam already. It's all ready, but he didn't get to eat the meat yet. And all of a sudden, the Romans come in, they're killing everybody back and forth. And he's like, well, I want to eat my meat still. So the question is, they already went through the ritual process of preparing and doing everything they need for the carbon, but he didn't get to eat from it yet. So the zrikas dam, the throwing of the blood, was done before while the Beis HaMikdash was standing. But now we want to know, can he eat from it after the Beis HaMikdash is no longer standing? So that is, like that guy in Tel Aviv eating the shawarma. So that's a little bit unclear. So that we should be asking ourselves that question. Samar Rabina, Lo'olam Kasavar, Kitchel Shait Vil Kitchel Levo. Tosfos changes the girsa, by the way. He says the opposite, but beyond the scope of what we're going to deal with now. Rabina says, really, there is no inherent sanctity today. But rather, so if that's the case, then should I, what's the deal with the status of the Bechor? What's the deal with the status of the meat? So here, again, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with a case of a Bechor offering where the blood was thrown before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Bechor of a bias, and then the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And the meat is still here. Umakshina besar ledamo, and basically, really, there should be no kedusha anymore, and that carbon is kaput. You don't have a Beis HaMikdash anymore. However, umakshina and makshina besar ledamo, but maybe we have a hekesh between basar and dam, between the blood and the meat. Ma damo b'mizbeach, af besaro b'mizbeach. So maybe I would have said I could eat the meat after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, because, okay, this rikas dam was already done. However, we're taught that the same way the blood required an altar, so too the meat requires an altar. If you don't have an altar anymore, then the meat is problematic. And then, so this is a double hekesh. We compare the laws of the blood of the Bechor to the laws of the meat of the Bechor, which requires a mizbeach. And then umakish meiser Bechor, and then we transfer those laws, since they're in the same pasuk, from Bechoros to meiser sheni. So the same way the dam, the same way the meat of the Bechor requires a mizbeach, so too meiser sheni requires a mizbeach, and therefore meiser sheni is not practiced today, where we don't have an altar in our temple, or a temple at all to begin with. And that is the conclusion of that piece. But the Gemara then asks, wait a minute. There's a rule in the laws of kachim, the laws of sacrifices in the temple, that when it comes to drushos, it comes to what do you call it? Hermeneutics. Again, it's like when you translate tefillin into phylacteries, we're like, oh, phylacteries, I know what that means. It doesn't help. So, when you translate drusha, it's like hermeneutics or exegesis. If you don't know what a drusha is, you might not know what exegesis is either. But anyway, so there is a rule when it comes to drushos of kachim that you can't do a double hekesh. You can't learn like from blood to meat to meiser sheni. That's a double hekesh. You can't do that. You can only do one hekesh. Well, here's my solution. Meiser dagan chulin. Meiser sheni is not kachim. Meiser sheni is considered chulin. So because it's not considered meat of the temple, therefore you're allowed to do a double hekesh. Oh, but wait a minute, the Gemara says. It depends. Turning a page. Well, it depends what angle you look at it from. If you're looking at the category we are extrapolating to, then you are correct. But if we view this matter from the category we're extrapolating from, which is Bechoros, which is Kachim, then you'd be guilty of a double hekesh. So therefore, the Gemara concludes, and it's the actual conclusion, Dam basar chadam milsihi. It's not really a hekesh that combines the dam and the basar, the blood and meat, but rather they are considered one category in general. So in truth, we're only dealing with a single hekesh from Bechoros to meiser sheni, the same way Bechoros require the mizbeach in order to be practiced nowadays, even though there might not be any sanctity to the land. So too, meiser sheni is not practiced nowadays without a mizbeach, even though there is no sanctity to the land, one would still require mizbeach in order to practice it. Now Tosos, so Tosos basically doesn't like this girsa of the Gemara. Because what's the girsa of the Gemara saying? The girsa of the Gemara is saying is that there's no inherent kedusha to the land of Israel today. So you look at Tosos, you test them at Aleph, the last Tosos, the really big one. Tosos asks on the fourth line there, the im tomar ilo kitsha im kain lo mishkachas la'maiser kedusha sa'aretz batla. Wait a minute. If there's no kedusha to the land of Israel, forget about where you're going to eat your meiser sheni. There's no such thing as meiser sheni, because meiser sheni is limited to the land of Israel. We don't have meiser sheni here in America. Meiser sheni only comes about because of the kedusha sa'aretz, because of the sanctity of the land of Israel. If there's no inherent sanctity to the land of Israel nowadays, what's the havamina for me to forget about meiser sheni, mizbeach, no mizbeach? There's no kedusha. There's no discussion. There's no such thing as meiser sheni to begin with. If the land of Israel today is no different than America, then there's just no meiser sheni to begin with. Forget about asking where you're going to eat it. So then Tosos answers. Tosos says that there might be a distinction between kedusha sabayis versus kedusha sa'aretz. Maybe there's no kedusha to the temple per se. There's no temple nowadays, but there is still general kedusha to the land of Israel nowadays. However, he asks if that's true, if there's no special kedusha to the Beis Hamikdash or maybe to Yerushalayim specifically, then if so, if Imkain, Yavi Meiser Sheni Necha B'chol Ar Yisrael, I should be able to eat Meiser Sheni in any city. Why should I have to bring it to Yerushalayim specifically? So this is a long Tosos, maybe for another shiur at another time. But why do I bring this in? Well, this will see at the end. And Phyllis, I know we have a few minutes until you have to go, so I'm bringing it in now. This is important because Shemitah. I brought with me the Rav Rimon Shemitah book. All right, this is like the modern Bible of Shemitah. I know Rabbi Cohen's giving a 3-part class on it. Did he start it yet? Or
No.
okay, October. So this is just he's using the same sefer, so just to whet everyone's appetites. What's wonderful about Rav Rimon is just the flow charts in here. How he just distills an entire sugya just with a nice, beautiful flow chart, summarizes everything, as you can see. So you probably can't see it well on the screen, but I'll tell you what he says. There are basically 3 schools of thought in Rishonim when it comes to whether Shemitah is obligatory nowadays. There's the Baal Ma'or and the Ravid who say not applicable nowadays. It's just a midas chasidus. It's a nice thing to do. On the other extreme, you have the Ramban who believes, based on the Chachamim in the Gemara, that Shvius nowadays is midoraisa, biblically obligated. And then the middle shita, which is what Rov Rishonim, most Rishonim believe, most medieval commentaries believe, is that Shvius today is midrabanan. It's only rabbinical in practice. Now, there's a few reasons given for that. One reason is that you need bias kulchem, you need the majority of the Jewish people to be in the land of Israel. And there's a question, well, is it that once we get to 51% of Jews in the world in Israel becomes doraisa, or maybe the initial influx of Jews that came back to the land of Israel needed to be the majority of the Jewish people? So even if, after El Al Nefesh B'Nefesh flight, 1,000, a million, whatever, comes in with 51% of the Jews, it wouldn't necessarily trigger a doraisa chiyuv of Shemitah, which I believe is position of Rav Chaim Soloveitchik. One of the reasons given for why Shemitah would not be doraisa today is based on a debate in our Gemara. If the Kedusha that Ezra and the Ole Bavel, those who came up from Bavel, they established in the land of Israel, and after we lost the temple and were sent into Gullus, that Kedusha dissipated along with them, then there can't be a doraisa chiyuv to practice Shvius because there's no doraisa sanctity to the land of Israel vis-a-vis agricultural laws and perhaps other things as well. Therefore, the normative opinion is that Shemitah today is obligatory, but on a d'Rabbanan level, because of this opinion, according to many, that the Kedusha Rishona was Kidsha L'Shaita, only temporarily sanctified, but not Kidsha L'Asila, not for the future. So does that mean that there's still something to making Aliyah, even if there's no that Kedusha to that extent. Yeah, there's probably still something to it. But again, when we get closer to Yom Ha'atzmaut, we'll talk about Ramosha Shuva again, where Moshe finally believed that making Aliyah is a mitzvah kiyumis, which is, anyone remember what that is? Mitzvah kiyumis is most mitzvahs you have to do are, you got to do them, right? A mitzvah kiyumis is a voluntary mitzvah. It's, you know what? If you do it, call it kavod, very nice. We'll throw you an aliyah party, but we're not forcing everyone else to make aliyah. Which, when you think about it, that's kind of I don't know if everyone deliberately pots it's like Moshe, but that certainly is what it feels like in your typical, at least over here, that's what it feels like to me. That's the position we unwittingly adopted, which is, you know what, everyone, you can say in America and it's all fine, but when people make aliyah, we'll throw them a little bit of a party.
So Rabbi,
that's why I'm in bubble. Oh,
Rabbi,
Weren't forced to go.
sorry.
They were allowed to go. A few went,
Yeah.
but not.
Right. So that's like the fire. So Toby's saying, but what about the Oli Bavel? So that's like every Zionist rabbi's fire and brimstone drasha is, you know what, just like the Oli Bavel, and you know what happened with the Kohanim and Leviim, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, there's a Muslim.
So Rabbi, wouldn't if you hold to that it's midrabanan, then all of the mitzvot in the Torah that are pertaining to Eretz Israel then are out the window, according to the same sources that say that Shemitah is no longer.
So that's why, right? So Phyllis, that's why it's one of three rationales for why it's midrabanan today. There are other opinions which say no, actually, there's kedusha to the land of Israel. But Shvius, it's rather Shvius is the exception to the rule. In general, we have agricultural laws today. You have Meiser Sheni, you wouldn't because of the Mizbeach, but you have agricultural laws to a certain degree. But Shvius has unique requirements, such as what's called bias kulchem. It requires the majority of the Jewish people to have gone to the land and be living in the land of Israel. So one can maintain that there's kedusha, but you still need bias kulchem for it to be doraisa.
But that's D'Rabbanan, that rule.
That'd be doraisa. That'd be doraisa.
Why it says how many people have to actually be there in order for the mitzvah.
It's a whole piece in Reb Chaim. I'm sure Rabbi Cohen will cover it in his year when he does the book. Yeah, Toby.
Okay, thank you.
I mean,
It's one thing if you say, look, you needed the majority to be there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But if it's a Jewish nation by decree of the UN, whatever it is, it doesn't change.
Says Toby asks, because there's Jewish dominion in the land of Israel, does that change anything? I think the answer is, from a halakhic perspective, the government of Israel has no significance halachically. There is this kind of very radical Zionist belief that some people have. I don't know if you call them religious Zionists or just plain Zionists, I think it's called mamlachtiyut, where something like that, where they believe like that there's some, like divine, what's that called? Like divine mandate. What's it called? Mandate of heaven for the leaders of the state of Israel. But I don't know of any legitimate sources that support that. Yeah.
It would seem to make more sense just from an organizational point of view to, if you want to know whether laws apply or don't apply, what are you going to do? You're going to check the census every 10 years and it shifted back. No, it's under 50%. No, it's over 50%. Yeah. It's total affairs.
So according to this bias kulchem thing, we might have to wait till Mashiach for it to be the Raisa.
But it would seem to me that if you can say that, know that this is our country, we govern.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah,
that's something you can at least.
It's
clearly identified.
It's ruled by a majority government of people who are biologically Jewish, but it's by no means ruled by Judaism. So that's something to discuss as well. But anyway, that's maybe we'll say that for our Thursday morning hashkafa shir. Okay. No, not this week. Yes. Okay. Shkoach, thank you everyone for working your schedules to learn Gemara this week and to keep our consistent studies. And looking forward, everyone should have a Gemara Chasima Tova if I don't see you before Yom Kippur. And God willing, we'll figure out how to get this in next week as well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right, take care. Have a wonderful night.
You too.